Welcome to Ghost Host. I'm Natalie Osborne Thomason, author of 4 books on the paranormal and a former paranormal investigator. Today we're talking about 5 signs your work might be haunted, and also the 5 most haunted workplaces that you can actually be working in. You might not realise that you're in one of the top 5. Now, I have actually worked in 2 haunted locations. I'll tell you about that at the end. Now, the very first one, which might surprise people to work in, is if you work in a pub, then that is one of the most haunted locations, well, is the most haunted location. That's why a lot of the investigations I did were in pubs, because there's a lot of activity going on, and you get various different landlords, and each landlord would probably start out saying, no, I don't believe in ghosts, but by the time he'd finished his tenancy, he would be a believer. So we'd set our equipment up, spend the night there in the pub, and we'd often get motion sensors go off. We'd get footage, all kinds of things moving on their own, cold spots, doors opening and closing and things like that. So if you work in a pub, chances are it could be haunted, and I'll tell you some of the things that can happen as well, why you'll know your work's haunted. The second most haunted place is actually a bar. So this is more for Americans, because obviously we don't have as many bars in England, but in America you don't tend to have pubs, you have bars, and they tend to be haunted as well. The sort of things that happen will be glasses moving along on their own and things like that, voices, things being moved. And so yeah, if you work in a bar, chances are that could be haunted. Now, the third most haunted place, which some people would think is the most haunted, is a hospital. Now, I was going to get somebody to come on the show, but they said they were a bit nervous coming on because of worried about their job. So they give me their story to tell, and their name's Violet, and they worked on the paediatric ward at Northampton General Hospital. And on many night shifts that they were there, they would hear somebody shout their name, Violet, Violet. Well, more whisper than shout, and then turn around, there'd be nobody there. Now, that part of the hospital is 300 years old. It's the oldest part, and it kept happening, but only on night shifts. And it used to quite frighten her, but she said it wasn't like a nasty presence, but there'd be a very, very cold spot, and then she'd hear the Violet, Violet. And when she worked on the day shifts, because like nurses work different shifts, there'd be nothing there at all. So obviously hospitals, because of the tragedies, the deaths, the things that happen there, that's probably why they're haunted. I'm just checking on my list here, because my memory is not as good as it was. Hotel. If you work in a hotel, you think, why are hotels haunted? Well, hotels are often quite old, have lots of guests, they may have experienced deaths there, fights, all kinds of tragedies, accidents and things like that. So I've come across, and I've done investigations in haunted hotels. Now, the most famous haunted hotel is the one that features in The Shining, which is an actual hotel where people can stay, and people have done investigations there. So if you work in a hotel, it could be haunted. And the last place on the list is funeral home. So obviously a funeral home, by the very nature, deals with people that have passed on. So I've heard stories about all kinds of things going on there, and people being too frightened to work there and things like that. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of my own experiences, and then I'll go into the reasons why your work might be haunted. Right, oops, there's my ghost moving. When I was a teenager, I worked for a short while as a kennel maid in a Surrey Kennels, and it was an old farm, and there was a dairy barn, and I think the dairy maid, something bad had happened to her. I can't remember what the story was, but she haunted it. And at night time, she would walk around. You could hear the dogs that were kept in the dairy. They'd be crying and barking and howling and all of that. And I stayed in a caravan. I used to have to walk across to the toilet, and I used to be too scared at night to walk across in case I came across the dairy maid wandering about. And the dogs seemed to know it was haunted, because dogs have got a sixth sense. So that was a very haunted place. And then sort of many years later, I worked in a shop. Now, I was filling in a form because I wanted to work in this shop. It was quite local, the next town to me, you know, really convenient. Filling in the form. Just as I was filling in the form, I heard a man behind me say, "My name's Harry, I'm dead." And I just turned around thinking, who the heck's that? No one there. Carried on filling in the forms. I hate filling in forms anyway. And he goes, "I died upstairs. This was my shot." And he was talking about how he died and all of that. And I thought, oh, whoa, this is weird. And I spoke to the manageress who I was hoping would give me the job. And she said, "Oh, thanks for filling in the form." And I said, "Who's Harry?" And she said, "Who told you about Harry?" I said, "He did." And she said, "He's been dead years, since the 60s. And I said, "Well, he just told me about himself." But she gave me the job anyway. I mean, she could have thought, "Oh, this is a bit strange." And I actually saw Harry on many occasions. He used to throw things at me, he used to slap my bum when I was bending over, putting stuff out the back in the trolley, and he threw coins at me. And I used to see him walking by the alcohol aisle, and he'd got like a swaggery walk, almost like a man on a ship, that the ship was sort of moving like that. It was almost like he got a list to the way he walked. And I would see him on many occasions. Other people saw him. We saw loaves of bread levitating, moving, things would be thrown about. So yeah, that was quite common knowledge. But he told me about himself on my interview day. Now, the 5 things that might mean that your work is haunted, these are 5 things that could happen in any of the locations, a bar, a pub, a hospital, whatever. First of all, things being moved around that you haven't moved. So you put your keys down, you put an item down, and then it disappears. And it doesn't just disappear, you cannot find it, you're looking everywhere for it. Now, if you're working in a pub, this is a really common thing. Glasses getting smashed, bottles being tipped over, bar stools moving along on the floor on their own, things like that. So the objects moving on their own and things being smashed when there's nobody nearby. Another thing is voices. It's like the nurse that said that she was having her voice, she was hearing that voice, your voice being called. And usually it's very, very clear, and you'll turn around and you'll think, what the heck's that? So that's another thing that might be happening. Another thing that you might notice as well is cold spots. So there might be a room that's always cold, year in, year out, during the summer, really, really icy cold spots, and you can't understand it. And the last one I'll talk about is doors opening and closing on their own. Now, that's fine. Sometimes there might be a draft, sometimes a door, you know, breeze or whatever. But a heavy door opening on its own, and maybe even a heavy door closing on its own, again, that could be a sign. Now, most of these places that you're going to be working in that are haunted, the ghosts don't mean you any harm. I've not really had anything bad happen to me at all. So, in fact, it's made it a bit more interesting, the fact that these couple of places were haunted. So yeah, this is 5 reasons your work might be haunted, and the most haunted workplaces. And so I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is Ghost Host Natalie Osborne Thomason. A new video coming up soon. Thank you.
How much that moved?
Well, there's so much going down, man. No.
No.
That ain't for real, man.
I thought he was just taking the piss.